Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. We are discussing certificates of environmental clearance, and we're doing this with environmental program officers 3, Sally Maharaj and Tracey Oliviera-Harris. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to start off asking the question, though, please, Sally. What is the Certificate of Environmental Clearance?
I'm glad that you asked that. A Certificate of Environmental Clearance is a permit outlining conditions to ensure that a project at a particular location is conducted in an environmentally acceptable manner, meaning that the project is conducted to minimize any negative environmental impacts that to the environment and to sensitive receptors, providing that the conditions are adhered to by that CEC holder. Now, it's important to note too that a CEC provides environmental clearance, and it is not authorization to commence any works related to a project at that particular location. What persons fail to realize is that all other approvals must first be obtained. For example, you would probably need to get county medical of health approval for something like a poultry farm, or approval from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries for quarries or oil and gas activities.
So is it that when someone comes to you for the environmental certificate, you also remind them, okay, well, you need to get these other permits to be able to do this? And is this something that happens holistically? So anyone we go to, whether or not is building or health, they say, well, these are all the things you need to get?
Well, what happens, so if, for example, you go to health, they will advise you that, look, you need to go to the EMA, because really and truly, the CEC is actually one of the first approvals that is required. All other agencies actually will remind persons, you first need to go to the EMA, get your CEC from them, and then come back to us.
All right, thank you so much. But I like the fact that you say, okay, well, this is the first thing, and that makes me think of a process. So I want you to take me through that process, please, Tracey. I have this bright idea, and I want to do this, but how it is, do I go to the EMA or approach the EMA for this certificate? Take me through that process, thanks.
Okay, so good afternoon again, DK. So the CEC process, we have our forms. They're available on our website, which is www.ema.co.tt. And well, we've been moving towards an electronic process. So those forms are available electronically, all right? We do have them available in hard copy for persons who may be a bit challenged with the electronic process. So you have to fill out one of those application forms, and we also have guidelines which would explain how you fill out those forms. It takes you through a step-by-step process, including some diagrams and some flowcharts, which will explain how you go about filling out the form and then how you submit that form. What is important to note is that there's a fee attached to it, a fee of 500 TT, and that is payable to any First Citizens Bank. We also have been facilitating online transfers as well, so persons who are more savvy in that department can do actual transfers to us. And then once you make that payment, you go through the submission process. Now, as Sally indicated, we are part of a series of permits that have to be provided to these applications, and one of them being that from Town and Country Planning. So if it is a development that requires outline planning permission, they have to submit that application through the Develop TT platform. And basically, they're going through a new process, which is called the ACPS, the Automated Permitting Construction System. And that is a new initiative that the Town and Country Planning Division has implemented to kind of make a kind of streamline approach to approvals. And the EMA is part of that process. So once you need that outline planning permission, you apply through that platform. If, however, you already have outline planning permission, then you can submit it to TCPD still, but they use a Dropbox system. So that's where persons would actually submit more of a hard copy. They submit a hard copy of the application to Town and Country, and then we are notified and we collect those applications. Also, There are certain circumstances when applications can be submitted directly to the EMA, and that would be in instances when they are for agriculture, as well as for offshore developments. So offshore oil and gas applications can be made directly to the EMA. We would suggest that we made to the North Office, or our head office, which is on Elizabeth Street in St. Clair.
And I like the fact that, ladies, what it is you're telling me has me going between one and the other and following up naturally in terms of questions. I like the fact that you started to itemize different types of situations, Tracey, and I'll actually take that back to Sally. So in the sense that you spoke about offshore, you spoke about farming, there are different types of projects. Are there different types of areas that someone may not have to apply or is more important than somebody applies to? So if it's something that's going to be closer to a river, if it's something that has a lot more biomass involved, what are some of those different kind of distinctions, Sally, that for someone to say, okay, designated areas, how do we treat with that?
All right, so just to add on to what Tracey would have indicated a little while ago, the CEC process is really one mechanism used by the EMA to regulate development and mitigate environmental impacts. It is governed by the CEC rules and what you were referring to, the CEC designated activities order. Now, before embarking on any new activity, modification or expansion of those existing structures and processes, or even decommissioning or abandonment of projects altogether, persons must consult these rules. Now, there are 44 designated activities listed that require a CEC, and these could be broadly classified into sectors such as agricultural, coastal, land development, light and heavy manufacturing, mining, oil and gas, transport, waste management, and other services. So really and truly, it doesn't matter in terms of whether it's closer to a river or in terms of biomass. We really determine CEC applications based on the nature, scale, and location of your particular project. And we really encourage all developers to submit a CEC application to the EMA, especially during the planning phase of their project. So that way, the EMA can work with you, explain what is required, what you're going to do, what are the potential impacts, how can you go ahead and mitigate those impacts. So really and truly, it is based on the designated activities, and as indicated, it's 44 designated activities. Now, and just to add a little bit more there, once you submit a CEC application, this includes things such as conduct of site visits, requests for review, and for project-related information. We also consult with experts, other agencies, and most importantly, we have stakeholder notification and consultation involved there.
And you see that stakeholder consultation and notification, I want to get back to that, as well as assessment tools. We take a break, we come back with more. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are going in depth on the process and overview on everything that is dealing with certificates of environmental clearance. We're doing this with the Environmental Program Officers 3, Sally Maharaj, as well as Tracey Oliviera-Harris. And what are some of those assessment tools that would be used for these designations, Tracey?
Okay, so we have basically situations where you can have applications that are relatively straightforward, and we're able to go through the CEC process. As Sally indicated, you would have various things that have to be conducted. We have site visits where we go out and we actually assess the site and its natural state to get an idea of where this project is going to be taking place. Then we would go through the process of asking for any information that we need, and we do that through our request for further information. We have also some internal tools that we would use. So as Sally mentioned, nature, scale, location, those are some of the things that we look at when we're trying to look at the potential impacts that are associated with projects. Now, we have instances where the projects are more large scale, they have more significant impacts, and so a more in-depth assessment may be required. In those instances, they may be, a decision may be taken for them to go to an environmental impact assessment, or EIA. And now that is a more detailed assessment, as I said. And so how we go about doing that is that we would then draft the terms of reference. The terms of reference is a very detailed document that outlines the information that we would need from the applicant, and basically guides the way in which the EIA study should be conducted. Now, it's not done in isolation. Those terms of reference are drafted in consultation with the applicant, and then they are now encouraged to go out and have stakeholder consultations with agencies, as well as other stakeholders and interested parties in relation to what can be included and certain changes that could be made to the terms of reference. And through that process, they may make, suggestions for changes or inclusions into the document. And then once that document is finalized, something called a final terms of reference, then they can go and start doing their assessment. Now, when we get that information, we have a process where we would review. It's a collaborative process where we would have other agencies involved on a review team or committee, and we would then assess that information to basically, determine whether the impacts have been properly mitigated. And when I say mitigate, I mean manage. So how are you going to minimize those impacts to an acceptable level so that the potential impacts to the environment are reduced? And then we would then go through that process and make a determination. And the determination could either be that the certificate can be issued, or in some instances, we would have a no notice of refusal, where the CEC is, basically we cannot issue the certificate, and we would indicate why. And then we would also have situations where no CEC is required. Now, that would unlikely happen through the EIA process, but it would happen through the more straightforward process I mentioned initially, where we would be able to do the assessment through just questions and answers with the applicant.
And is there any position or possibility that initially would not want to issue the certificate, but the person goes back to the drawing board, they have some tweaks, or they work with you, and then you said, okay, well, with these amendments, you're able to go forward towards the determination being made for issuance of that certificate?
Right. So that really is the whole purpose behind the CEC application process. We want that iterative process where persons are able to, okay, these are the things that are concerns to the EMA as well as to other stakeholders that may have raised those issues. And they could definitely go back to the drawing board. Sometimes what they could do, they may even find a different location. So maybe the original location, because the CEC application process is site specific. So it is in relation to specific sites, right? So you may determine that this project really should not go here. It is a particularly sensitive environment. And so, regardless of how they try to manage the impacts, it may just not be enough. And so the person may actually take the stance of saying, okay, I still want to do this project, and I have found a more suitable site where this can now take place, and they can reapply. There's no limits to the number of times that you could reapply to the EMA for a particular application in terms of determination.
And that leads me to the question. Thank you very much for that, though. Potentially, I'm not saying that I ever did something like this, but I could tell my dad, well, I want permission to leave the house because I go in X, Y, Z. And yes, I get that permission. But after I leave that house, I go on A, B, C. So, Sally, what does the monitoring process look like to say, okay, well, what this person said they're going to be doing and they got the certificate for is actually what they're doing?
All right, great. So once the CEC is issued, then our permit monitoring takes over. So they take that certificate of environmental clearance, they will get in contact with what we now call that the CEC holder, and they work with them. So there are certain conditions within there that the CEC applicant should adhere to, and this is where adherence to those CEC conditions really help to ensure that that project is carried out in an environmentally sound manner. So that monitoring takes place once the project has started, and it continues for the lifetime of that particular project. And when I say lifetime, I mean there are some instances when you have not only what we call site preparation and construction works, but the operational aspects which could really have a lot of negative environmental impacts. So Conditions are also included, for instance, to include monitoring collection of monitoring data, which is submitted to the EMA. We assess those, and that is based on all our other pieces of legislation. For example, adherence to the air pollution rules, the water pollution rules, the noise pollution control rules. So the CEC really encompasses all of those things in there. And as we indicated before, it is really about looking at managing your environment as well as any impact to your sensitive receptors.
Can a situation arise where the factors around which a CEC was issued changes through no fault of the person who's gotten the certificate, but that would impact that certificate that they have in terms of okay.
Yes.
What would an example of that look like?
Okay, for instance, someone may have issued a certificate of environmental clearance for a particular project at a location. Let's just take, for example, a simple, let's just say a poultry farm. Somebody would have applied for rearing of 10,000 heads of poultry. However, they now want to come back and say, okay, I want to expand my facility. I now want to go up to 20,000 heads because business is going good. Now, there is a condition within the CEC that allows you to come back to us. However, if you're looking at expansion or significant modification to what you already have, then you'll have to go through a new CEC application. However, if it is a modification, and another example could be, let's just say, an oil and gas pipeline that you're changing out and what we call like for like, then that modification that does not result in any increased environmental impact or risk can be handled under that issued CEC. And there's no additional information that we may need to put in terms of additional conditions to manage that impact. All
right, so what about if there's still the 10,000 chickens, but you're getting more neighbors? And I'll ask for that answer after what it is you're going to put in, Tracey, because I see that we have about 2.5 minutes now.
Okay.
So Tracey, yes, go ahead. You were going to add something, please.
Well, it wasn't specifically to your question.
Not a problem.
But what I was going to say is that the CEC process, it recognizes that things change in the sense that the CEC, once issued, is valid for a period of 3 years if you do not commence. You have 3 years within which to commence your works. So Sally would have stated that it's valid for the lifetime of the project once you commence those works within 3 years of the issue date. And that will be the date stated on the certificate, at the end of the certificate. So what we recognize is that some persons get CECs and for various reasons, they do not start, right? It may be a situation with funding issues or the proponents may encounter some sort of challenge. And so that is when the CEC will actually lapse and it ceases to be valid. And in those instances, the applicant would then have to reapply to the EMA to get a new certificate. And the reason being that things would have changed, particularly where the environment is concerned. The environments that the project is going to be placed within could have changed in that time. And so they would now have to, again, go through that CEC process in terms of making sure that the particular impacts are properly managed.
All right, and I think our environment has changed in the sense that we're running out of time, but www.ema.co.tt for the information. And we want to thank you very much, Tracey, Oliviera-Harris, and Sally Maharaj for just sharing that information with us. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you so much for joining us.